want to bring in 2020 Democratic presidential candidate and former Housing and Urban Development Secretary Julian Castro. Appreciate you being here, and I don't know how much of that you got to hear, but I do want to get your reaction to what the president had to say in the wake of the Mueller report. He was asked repeatedly, as you may have just heard Kristen talk about whether or not he asked President Putin to stay out of the 2020 election, and he said, "We didn't discuss meddling." What they did talk about, he says, is that President Putin told him presumably the Mueller investigation, started out as a mountain, ended up being a mouse. Your reaction to that?
Well, what we know from our intelligence agencies, what they've told us is that Russia did meddle in the 2016 election. The Mueller report covered that. Russia did meddle, and they meddled on behalf of Donald Trump. And so what's going on here is that I bet he's hoping they're going to do it again in 2020, that they're going to help him out again in 2020. And it's incumbent upon Congress to help ensure that we do everything that we can to get to the truth that the Mueller report tried to lay out, and also hold this administration accountable to make sure that we do take steps to secure our 2020 election. And it's also very fascinating, to watch this president in the past say, well, Putin has denied that Russia meddled in 2016, and I guess you got to take him at his word. A couple of days ago, we marked the 30th anniversary of Donald Trump taking out an ad. I believe it was in the New York Times, but one of the New York papers essentially calling for the death penalty for the Central Park Five, who were a group of 5 young men, black and brown young men, who had been accused of raping a woman and were later exonerated when somebody else was charged with the crime. But back then, he was willing, without ever hearing any kind of evidence, to say that these folks should be put to death. And now, when you have 17 intelligence agencies that have said that Russia definitely did meddle, all of a sudden, he's willing to take the word of a leader like Vladimir Putin, who time and again has shown himself to be adversarial to the United States and to be dishonest.
Let me ask you about some other...
It's fascinating to think about the history of this president, and when it's convenient for him, because he benefited from this, to really, slow walk any kind of accountability for Russia here.
The president did get some good news today. As you know, the unemployment rate at a half-century low. Private sector workers saw solid wage gains. The average hourly rate went up 3.2% in April. Mick Mulvaney says, look, even if people don't like you, they will vote for you if the economy is good. Essentially repeating what we heard back in the Clinton era, it's the economy, stupid. Based on these numbers that we saw today, is Donald Trump a stronger candidate against you, against any Democrat, than the approval polls would suggest?
I don't think so. In fact, yesterday there was polling that showed that he's trailing several Democratic candidates by 5 points, all the way up to 10 points. And the reason
here's the asterisk I'm going to put on that poll. The margin of error was 5.7%. Really, the only one who was clearly out of that margin of error was your fellow Texan, Beto O'Rourke. The next two in the poll were 6% leading Trump, but again, with a margin of error of 5.7%.
So let's still talk about that, right? So you have a president that, if you believe his rhetoric, he has a strong economy, right? The nation has a strong economy, and according to him, we've never been doing better, and yet you have several Democratic candidates, and this isn't the first poll that's shown that. About a month ago, there was another poll that showed similar numbers, right, that are doing very, very well against him. And the reason for that is two reasons. Number one, people know that this country is doing well not because of Donald Trump, but in spite of Donald Trump. First of all, Barack Obama helped create a lot of that success that we're still benefiting from. He basically inherited this thing at the 2-yard line, and he's celebrating when he gets into the end zone like he's the one that brought us all the way from the 10-yard line of the opponent. He didn't. He's profiting off the work that Barack Obama brought to this country. Secondly, they know that this president is not a strong leader. they can tell that this country is doing well in spite of the fact that we have a very unstable, erratic president that is not offering strong leadership. And then I would say a third thing also is, last week I was in Las Vegas, and I visited in Las Vegas, underneath the Las Vegas Strip, a storm drainage tunnel where hundreds of homeless people sleep at night because they don't have a place to live. My point being that there are still a lot of Americans out there who are not doing well, who are being left behind, and you know what? They may even have a job. They may be one of those Americans that are employed. Then we have a 3.6% unemployment rate, and it looks good on paper, but they're not making enough to pay the rent and to put food on the table and to provide for their family. And so everything is not hunky-dory out there in our country. I think Americans understand that, and that's one of the reasons why this president actually is in danger of losing in 2020.
And I know it's one of the reasons that you're running for president, and congratulations are in order. You tweeted today that, I'm quoting, "We just confirmed we've secured 65,000 donors to guarantee a spot at the first debates." So that's definitely good news. There was also a recent New York Times article that headlined your candidacy this way: Julian Castro needs a defining moment. It hasn't come yet. So my question is for Democratic voters who, for them, the number one question is who can beat Donald Trump? That's their top consideration. How do you convince them you're a stronger candidate than a Biden or a Sanders or an O'Rourke?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We have about 41 weeks left until the Iowa caucus. But who's counting? Except those of us who are running. And so it doesn't faze me if I'm not the front runner in early May of 2019. What I want to make sure that we do is to build a strong campaign so that I am the front runner in the spring of 2020. And here's what I tell people. Number one, I'm one of the few folks in this race that has strong executive experience. I served as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, managing a $48 billion budget, 8,000 employees. I served as mayor of the 7th largest city in the United States, San Antonio. I represent a new generation of leadership, and I think that people want new blood in 2020.
Which could be Beto O'Rourke, which could be Pete Buttigieg.
No, there's no question that right. You have 21 people, but I think that when you put all of these things together.
Just to be honest, are polling higher than you are right now?
They are, yeah, and it's May 3rd, 2019, so we still have a lot of time. Also, when I'm getting out there, we're having these candidate forums, and I'm connecting with voters because I've been talking about how we become in the 21st century the smartest, the healthiest, the fairest, and the most prosperous nation on earth, and putting a blueprint to that. And I think people want to hear specifics. And so I'm confident that by the time that Iowa caucuses on February 3rd of 2020, that I am going to be one of the front runners. And if we go back in these presidential contests, there are plenty of examples. In fact, I would say that it's actually more the exception that you have somebody that is a front runner from the beginning until the end. You have a lot of change, and we just had that same poll, I think, that you're talking about, said that 64% of Democratic primary voters said that they're still open to changing their mind about who they're going to support. So there's a lot of time, and I'm going to do what our families do, which is I'm going to go out there and I'm going to work hard and build a strong campaign and make sure that we grow in a steady way so that I'm right there when Iowa caucuses next year.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.